So our next presentation, welcome my colleague Huong, Director of Regulatory Science for the Critical Path Institute, with a presentation of upcoming and new efforts for rare disease at C-Path, with an ongoing increase of activities overall for rare disease. So very excited to have Huong present you some of these new efforts that are just starting.
Thank you. This is exciting. Thank you, everybody. And I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me here. And I'd like to welcome everybody virtually online. Again, like Alex said, I serve as Director of Regulatory Science, and I come from a background with pharmacology, research in immunology, and a couple of years spent at FDA. So I'm out on this side, helping the community and the patients and trying to reach goals and meet the unmet needs for rare disease patients. So it is my pleasure to talk to you about new collaborations for RDCA-DAP. And the programs that we have been under discussion is exciting for me, and it feels like my little babies that I've been working on. So I know you've heard about critical path and you're familiar with it, but I just want to set a baseline to review with you that we are supported by FDA. We are global. We have worldwide industry partners as well as academic partners around the world. And right now we have 26 active programs and consortia, and they all work to meet the mission of critical path, which is to serve as a catalyst for innovation that accelerates a path to a healthier world. And it does so with a small contingency in Tucson, Arizona, but a large contingency of staff worldwide. And again, we do operate in a pre-competitive space to ensure that collaboration for data sharing, for knowledge sharing, and for expertise sharing, so that we can de-risk the medical product development process. And by working together, we serve as the neutral convener so that we can provide that forum for discussion and data sharing, and build that confidence in data sharing and having the expertise for the interpretation of the data to help us determine which regulatory pathways to focus on, which way to maneuver. And we do so by iterative processes through submissions of endorsement packages through EMA, FDA, as well as PMA. And through each iteration of submission, we learn from what has worked, what could be done better, and then we incorporate that into subsequent submissions so that we build on our knowledge. And by doing so, we help to develop new methods, new innovative tools to assess safety and efficacy of medical products that can build confidence in the regulatory review process. And again, we do target regulatory endorsements of these novel methodologies for drug development tools to be used by the community and drug sponsors. As I said, we have 26 active programs, and I am excited to tell you about two new ones. CPA1 is our abbreviation for the critical path for alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. It is a pre-consortium, and I will get into that in a little bit. The second program is critical path for lysosomal disorders, pre-consortium also. So here we go. So as a basis of what C-Path does, most, if not all of our work is based on the 5 core competencies that relate to data source, data resources, biomarkers, as well as quantitative medicine to help us with modeling and analytics. There's also clinical outcome assessments to incorporate the different measures that are available. And then, of course, regulatory science and development science in terms of how to best approach a regulatory agency and develop a strategy that can ensure success through the regulatory process. And based on these 5 core competencies, we use those to help build the concentration areas, which on the previous slide are the 26 active programs and consortia. And some of these may be disease focused, such as the neuroscience programs that can have Duchenne, like Jarina had presented on, focus on Huntington disease, or perhaps focus on sickle cell disease and type 1 diabetes disease. So those are some of the concentration areas that the core competencies will help support. But at the same time, the core competencies can help support the safety science through better understanding of biomarkers, better understanding of orphan diseases. What can we develop that can be applied across various diseases and not disease specific? So those are some of the areas. And by doing so, I know that speakers earlier on had shown the intricate graph of the funnel of the different data types on the left that can come in. And in this way, RDCA-DAP can help us with the rare diseases that are coming out, the new consortiums that are coming out, and develop new drug development tools. So this is where the core competencies come in as the interplay segment in that area. And again, RDCA-DAP, where we would like to have been using RDCA-DAP is to create this ecosystem of collaboration and partnership. And these are some examples of some of the consortium and programs that we have at C-Path. So the use of RDCA-DAP and the integration of the data and information have been used to develop clinical trial simulation tools, identify biomarkers, and identify certain endpoints that can be used for various disease focus areas that I've listed here: Duchenne, polycystic kidney disease, Huntington's disease, and as Amanda had presented earlier this morning on transplant therapeutics, where they actually use the clinical trial simulation tools as well as endpoints. And also, as Sergey had presented on the Critical Path for Sickle Cell Disease Consortium, they focus on biomarkers, endpoints, as well as disease progression models. And that is shared with the Critical Path for Therapeutics for the ataxia, CPTA. One unique consortium that just started earlier this year is the Rare Disease Clinical Outcome Assessment Consortium, RDCOA-C. And they are focused on, of course, COAs. But again, it's using the platform and the way the data is available. That's what we are hoping to build on. And the new programs that we have starting will be in that left, my far left row, for work groups and the future of Rare Disease Consortium. And again, we'd like to build on the expertise of RDCA-DAP to reach particular drug development tools that will be specifically used for alpha-1 as well as lysosomal disorders. So let me dig in a little bit to the critical path for alpha-1, CPA1. As you may know, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency is an autosomal codominant disease. Much of the implication is in children and adults with chronic or severe liver disease, but in adults, it can also present as severe pulmonary disease. And oftentimes, patients may be misdiagnosed because they may be diagnosed as asthma or COPD and not necessarily alpha-1 antitrypsin. So there is a need for better identification. And just wanted to let you know that the alpha-1 protein is a serum protease inhibitor. I'm sorry, I have a pharmacology background and I really do like digging into these pathways, but it is expressed from the serpina-1 gene family. And right now, we have 20 known genotypes, but there are variations in each of those. And not every genotype, some genotype may be ultra rare. So it's really hard to identify these patients. And the current diagnosis is based on the serum level, and there are 4 products approved in the US and a 5th one that is approved in Spain that is used for augmentation therapy. So that is where we stand, and there are 2 testing options to identify alpha-1 patients. But again, there are 20 different genotypes that are available, that are known. So this project is a funded project, and it's exciting for me because it's a first project at C-Path that collaborates with the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, CBER. So that is a new area of collaboration for C-Path, but we do also partner with our Center for Disease Evaluation Research as well. It is a 15-month project, and we've already started this back in May. And again, it's a pre-consortium. So with the time frame of 15 months, we are not able to do everything that previous consortium that were presented this morning can do. But the objective is to build a foundation for the understanding of the disease, as well as outline a roadmap for the Envision Consortium when it fully kicks off. The other pre-consortium is the critical path for lysosomal disorders. Some may call it lysosomal storage disorders, but we are referring to the lysosomal disorders as a family. This too is an autosomal genetic disorder, and the challenge here is that lysosomal disorders are heterogeneous. And it's heterogeneous where there's at least 70 or more monogenetic disorders. So to be able to determine or come up with a solution for this is going to be a challenge, but we're ready to take it on. And it is an inherited metabolic disorder, and some of the abnormalities are a result of increased toxic buildup in the lysosomal compartment. And it may be due to some enzymatic deficiencies, which result in cellular dysfunction and tissue damage. And it's pretty much watered down to that the body cannot get rid of its waste. So that presents a problem. This funded effort is through CEDAR, and it is a 10-month project. It is shorter, but what we are working here is a little different from the Alpha-1 Pre-Consortium. The Alpha-1 Pre-Consortium, we need to determine the sustainability for a full consortium, how the governance is going to do, how it will operate. We need that framework, that roadmap built. For the lysosomal disorder, we really just want to spend this 10 months to understand the common unmet drug development needs that can be applied, again, across the various lysosomal disorders. And again, develop the framework on where to start looking for a tangible solution to address these needs. So I kind of hinted at this in terms of the pre-consortium model that we have at C-Path. Not every consortium at C-Path started out as a pre-consortium, but we have this kind of model established now that in a pre-consortium phase, it's a due diligence to determine the feasibility of a fully envisioned consortium. And some of the key points that we need to carry out during the pre-consortium include identifying the key unmet needs. For Alpha-1, it's pretty clear. It's one disease, one protein product. For lysosomal disorder, not so easy. So it's a challenge to identify the unmet needs there. We also want to spend this time identifying and defining what's the scientific, financial, operational, and regulatory strategies that we can follow and pursue. And then in that span of space, we also want to develop an outreach plan, because it'll be important to determine and identify who the key stakeholders are. Again, with alpha-1, it's one disease. With lysosomal, there's multiple. So how do we attack that plan to reach out to stakeholders and identify who can come join us and work in this pre-consortium collaboration? Also, during the pre-consortium phase, we want to look at the available data and determine what the unmet needs are and sort of rank them in prioritization. I mean, if we had all the money and the time in the world, we want to do everything, but we need to prioritize. So this is going to help us focus on what's most tangible. And also during the pre-consortium phase, we want to generate the research plan. That's going to be the plan that the full consortium, the Envision consortium, will follow in terms of determining the molecular understanding of disease, possibly exploring what's existing in terms of biomarkers or imaging, what tools or endpoints are available right now that can be used for a specific application to then accelerate drug product development. And of course, we want to identify sources of existing data. And it's not only the existing data, but also the type of data that may be available. Is it all natural history? Is it all patient perspective? What data can be available that we can draw on? And again, that's where RDCA-DAP can help us sift through and integrate the various types of data that are available. And from there, our hope is to launch the fully Envision consortium. So as I had mentioned, CPA for alpha-1 antitrypsin pre-consortium, this started in May 2022. It's a 15-month project. We've already have a team in place dedicated to this pre-consortium. We've also identified a couple of key stakeholders, including the Alpha-1 Foundation itself, both here in Florida, or here in the US in Florida, and then we're also looking to reach out for the Alpha-1 Foundation in Ireland. We do have participation from the COPD Foundation as well. We have identified a couple of industry key players who have products in the pipeline or who are interested in this space for alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency. We do have a couple of clinicians, frontline care provider, that are treating and seeing alpha-1 patients. So having their perspective and knowledge and expertise in this area will help us in terms of what we can do better or how we can help the community better. And of course, we have academic partners that have been identified and have expressed high interest in helping us through this pre-consortium phase and potentially staying on. We're hoping to stay on for the full Envision consortium. And for our FDA partners, again, this is the pre-consortium that works in collaboration with CBER and CDER. So we're managing, somebody had mentioned earlier, I think, about stakeholder management. So it's an interesting dynamics, but so far everybody has been positive and excited about joining this pre-consortium to see this move forward. And in the top corner there, I just give you an example of the identified aims that we are proposing to do in this period of the pre-consortium. And right now we're in the middle of going through aims 2, 3, and 4. And for the lysosomal disease, it's a little more challenging. I show here examples of types of lysosomal disorders. This is not all encompassing, it is not all inclusive, but some of the examples that can be considered depending on the data that's available, the GM1 and 2, and all the variants in these disorders as well. So there will be more, there are more, and we're looking to include and encourage the different stakeholders to participate with us. And this program, the Critical Path for Lysosomal Disorder, is 2 weeks old. We just started on September 1st. So we're still going through to identify who the key players are, the patient groups, reaching out to them, and the industry groups, see where they're at in their pipeline, see where their interest levels are at, and making the pitch for the need for them to come on board and join us and entice them to share data. And of course, academia. So again, this just started 2 weeks ago, and we're barely at that front side of the aim 1 yellow bar, but we are looking to address 4 different aims in this one. So again, some of the information that we're looking for will determine where this goes and how the planning, the regulatory strategy planning will move forward. I think I ran through that pretty quickly, but I think that was basically an introduction to Pre-Consortium at C-Path, how they work, what we're looking at, and where we're looking for more input and participation. Thank you. If you have questions.
Hi, Ron Bartek of the Friedrichs Ataxia Research Alliance. I apologize in advance if I missed this early in your presentation, but I'm a little confused about the decision-making process of when you select a disease for pre-consortium or full consortium.
So thank you for those who didn't online who didn't answer. So the question is about how we select, how C-Path selects disease areas for pre-consortium. For these 2, FDA approached us. So FDA has identified a need in the community, and they directly approached Critical Path to ask us to do a feasibility study to see if an envisioned full consortium would be feasible. And this is part of that first step. So it's CDER that reached out to us for the lysosomal project, and CBER reached out to us for the Alpha-1 project.
So C-Path itself has not initiated pre-consortia or full consortia?
No. Klaus or?
I'm not Klaus.
Billy?
I'm Billy Dunn, FDA. I kind of have a question to build on yours, which is that it might not be immediately apparent to everyone exactly how RDCA-DAP differs from the consortium and overlaps with consortium. There's kind of a partial event overlap there, I think, and I don't think people should, it can be confusing, and I don't think folks should assume that a disease that's addressed by the RDCA-DAP effort would necessarily need to then graduate, that's not the right term, right, to a consortium of itself, and where and when, you know, a freestanding consortium plays a role, and just exactly how that overlap exists, and how consortia activities can interface with RDCA-DAP and vice versa. I think that would be an important, I don't know if that's for you or some of your colleagues, but I think somebody should probably take that.
I'm going to defer to Klaus.
So yeah, no, that's a beautiful question, both from Ron and from Billy. So RDCA-DAP is intentionally built as a non-consortium so that it has that span and that flexibility to be able to cover any and all
rare diseases in need, and we know that all of them are in need. Now, of course, not every single disease will have the same amount of data. Not every single disease will have the same amount of industry activity. Not every disease will have the same amount of clinical research already built up. But that's why RDCA-DAP was built. For those diseases, and this is the point that we were discussing during the break, Ron, right? So if your area doesn't yet have like a registry or a research framework, you can come talk to RDCA-DAP, and through Nord's powers, we can help set that up. If you already have one of those efforts going and you want to optimize it and make it regulatory grade and have the contribution help accelerate drug development, come to RDCA-DAP. If you're thinking about starting a new effort, same deal. We can help you with that. But there are times at which there is such an amount of activity in a family of diseases like in lysosomal, or in a single disease like in alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, that has a lot of interest on the part of industry, has a lot of support on the part of the agency, but it just so happens that it's reaching a really bottleneck situation. That's when we can consider jointly setting up a consortium for that disease. It doesn't need to always be, as Billy was alluding to, that the answer to every disease is a consortium or disease family. RDCA-DAP is there for a reason that provides that flexibility, but that flexibility includes, whenever it makes sense, to consider assessing if a consortium is the right place to put the effort. And this is why we have these pre-consortia activities. And then if the feasibility is there, we launch a full consortium, but the RDCA-DAP remains as the glue, as the foundation. The engine of collaboration that is fueled by the data, that's RDCA-DAP. And then from there, you can expand to solve any problem through whatever mechanism makes the most sense. So I hope that answered that question. And you're looking at Big Billy like I should be saying something else. Okay.
No, I'm not. I
That's
just
a good
looked
thing.
at digesting your answer. This is ludicrous. Somebody left this set on giant setting. So I think that gets at most of it. Doesn't answer your question.
With one exception, maybe. So, alluding to your earlier comment, Billy, should there be diseases that are involved in RDCA-DAP that should think about graduating?
It's not.
I know, but should think about being considered as a pre-consortium or a consortium. Would there be an advantage to that? Would there be any reason to believe one disease versus another should look to that?
I'll let Klaus answer this, but I'm going to comment on it, not answer it. I don't think you should be thinking about graduation advantages and disadvantages. These are tools that serve a purpose. And one of the things you didn't mention, Klaus, which is why I was digesting your answer, is that you should maybe comment a little bit about how the consortia have members, okay, and those stakeholder members drive the research agenda and all the other things. You could talk about that. Whereas RDCA-DAP is a partnership supported by the agency with you, Nord involvement, that's broad and allows multiple stakeholders to participate and contribute, but then provides that out to the community to work with. I think it's different than the research-driven individual consortium model, and I thought maybe you might want to talk about that.
Right. No, that's actually an important reminder. Thank you for keeping looking at me, because that really spurred the thought that I missed something, and I did. That's a clear distinction. RDCA-DAP is built as a non-consortium that doesn't have that membership structure because, again, we want to keep that flexibility going. Whenever there's that additional context where a consortium makes sense, we can consider it. And those consortia will have industry membership and the specific funding and governance mechanisms that our consortia are known to have. But that's not necessarily always needed. The same thing goes for this whole notion of the how formal an endorsement of a drug development tool needs to be through the multiple mechanisms that the agency has. All mechanisms are valid. There are some that carry a significant process behind them, others that are lighter in the process, but equally impactful in the decision that is reached. And that at the end of the day, it's all about making the collaboration happen to meet those needs and address those bottlenecks. Yes.
I appreciate that this effort is a little nascent and you're still figuring things out, and appreciate you walking us through your process. If you have anything to share, could you share on how you are selecting the patient groups that are invited to participate? You know, using lysosomal storage disorders as an example, there are many patient groups that are focused on that. I don't know that it would be feasible to engage with all of them. Have you thought about how to include feedback from all without, you know, appropriately right sizing that effort? And my second question would be, when you're looking at sort of the unmet needs, same thing, what are your criteria for prioritizing one versus the other? Is it based on, I'll say, solvability? Is it based on furthering drug development? If you have anything you can add to that, I'd appreciate it.
All right. So
Hey, Huong, why don't we, can I invite you, Pam, to help us with that one, because Nord has a really important perspective here.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I caught all of your question, except for the fact that there's really isn't a need for a consortium to be established for those organizations in the lysosomal space to participate in our RDCA-DAP. They could actually do both potentially. I think Billy and Klaus and all had described it really well, that there's the consortium have specific focus. It's like a specific charter within the field of advancing research, but you could participate in RDCA-DAP. The patient advocacy organizations can participate in RDCA-DAP without having to have that particular charter in place, and they could establish their own charters with access to the data that is contributed by the whole community at any time. So that's a consortium.
Right. So yes.
beyond.
So anybody can come, and all you need to do is just contact us, and we will make sure that we find, depending on the type of organization and the way the consortium plan is being set up, how the participation can happen. So we're welcome. Everybody's welcome, and we're welcome to anybody and everybody that wants to participate. So if you're going to join the journey, come talk to us.
right, and a little specific, that's the difference between the alpha-1 and the lysosomal. Alpha-1, we did reach out at conferences that the American Thoracic Society had a conference, and we went to reach out to see who's in the space of alpha-1. And that's where we identified certain clinicians, the academic partners, and the foundations. We've had many conversations with Alpha-1 Foundation in terms of the amount of information they have, the registries, and the connections they also have readily to introduce us to industry partners. So that's helping us a lot. For lysosomal disorder, for being two weeks old, we're still working on that. So, I'd be happy to talk with you afterwards so that we can share, and that way it's just networking. Meet one person, get another 3, and move on and multiply that way. So that's what we're looking for lysosomal.
So as a rep of an advocacy organization that does not have an active consortia, one of the things that I'm very cognizant of is the number of trials that are happening now, and a concern about what's going to happen to their data, because I'm assuming they haven't been set up to enable the sharing. And we hear all the time about how once the trial's ended, then suddenly there's no more data, or excuse me, there's no more resources at the company to then do the data management and curation and the reconsenting and everything that might be needed to get things to RDCA-DAP. So there's this intermediate step that I wonder about what kinds of resources might be there. And I'm wondering if RDCA-DAP has any resources that they could share, things like templates for informed consent around data and sample sharing, tools, I think, as was mentioned this morning, about how we give all kinds of education to our community for when they're enrolling in clinical trials. I'd love to have templates to be able to share to say, when you're enrolling, ask these questions about what's going to happen to your data. And three, advocacy to say to the companies in this space, you don't need to make a decision right now about who and where you're going to share your data. But if you want us to help advertise your trials for you, we want an assurance that you're setting up and designing from the get-go to be able to share. But the incentive for all of this, and let alone the tools to get there, to me are still a little bit unclear. So I see.
Do you want to start, Huong?
No. I'm going to defer to you.
Okay.
You gave me the out.
All right. So, Penny, as always, great question. So there's a lot to unpack with that message, and I think that speaks to the alignment that we've always wanted to have since the beginning. So when the dream began, and we wanted to set up a platform that would allow that transformation of data into insights in rare diseases to happen, came with that vision as well. We will start with the data that we can aggregate from the data sets that exist. That we had to start at one point, and we did that, as you've seen, in a multitude of diseases. Even in those diseases, and this is, Tarina knows this, not every single one of those data sets we could integrate because of specific limitations with, for example, consent. Okay, let's capture that, mark that, and then circle back to the other efforts that are happening within RDCA-DAP to say, okay, are we going to go Ron's route of reconsenting everybody just because nobody can say no to him? Or are we just going to accept the reality? Or are we just going to accept the reality that maybe that data set is going to be off limits for a while? It's an equally valid lesson to learn, because then you can say, okay, prospectively, to your point, this is how the language ought to be. Now, we can provide, we're happy to provide that support through the RDCA-DAP setup, and our Nord partners can do that extremely well. But the other thing is that reality is also moving quickly. And we may give you a recommendation based on the current interpretation of the current regulations today. That may change tomorrow. So just as the mantra goes, go to the agency if you're a sponsor early and often, you kind of need to do the same here, because that reality is not set and it continues to evolve. So that's component number two. You don't need a consortium to do all those things. But when there is a specific need to consider a consortium, if it's a consortium in a rare disease, the glue for the data will always be RDCA-DAP. Doesn't matter if you have a consortium or not, the glue for the data will always be RDCA-DAP. And that's a key message to also stress, so that there's no confusion that the Duchenne consortium has its own separate database from the polycystic kidney disease consortium. All those, even if those that existed before, the home for the data will always be RDCA-DAP. So, okay. Thanks, Huong.
You're welcome.
Yes, please.
So was it Penny, to your question earlier, as part of this partnership, Nord has been evaluating and developing some initial educational resources and tools to help people organizations to become research ready. And this year we've done inventory of tools that other people have used in other venues, and working with our partners at C-Path on data sharing agreements, consents, et cetera, et cetera. We have some that we provide to our own members if they're interested, but we are taking it to the next level. And we're going to be, through this analysis and evaluation, building upon that and making them publicly available in a library this year. So we've done a lot of work on it, but we've got a lot more to go. And the idea is to empower people, whether it be at the individual level or at the organizational level, to have the tools that they need to be able to feel confident that they can participate in trials, that they understand the drug development process, that they understand the roles of the stakeholders and participants in the process and that they understand the value of their data, what is good quality data. Data literacy is an example. You're going to hear a little bit about that from some of our colleagues that are speaking this afternoon. So more to come, but there has been some work done that has not been the focus of today's session.
Yes.
Okay. So I really appreciate, you're right, this is like the wrong person. I appreciate the fact that you did distinguish between consortia and non-consortia activities. And I have an idea and I have a project, and Tarina, this goes back to the question that I asked you. If you only have one industry partner interested in a project, is that okay? Or do we have to find other industry partners before we approach RDCA-DAP? Because I am fine with the work, us doing the work ourselves, but I don't want it to just be us who knows it. I am very, very, very frustrated when only one organization has access to information. So I want to do it, but I do want it to be shared with the community, and I want you guys to do that. I don't want to do that.
Right. One thing I can address to that part is the model of a consortium or pre-consortium, and we have various factors. It could be some of these pre-consortium are single funded from FDA first. Other consortiums and pre-consortiums we have had are either funded singly by an industry partner or by a patient foundation. So that is a possibility as well.
Right. So, and we have clear criteria, because one of the things that we never want to do is break our neutrality. So with single companies, we're always open to have the conversation, but we will be very upfront with the criteria that need to be met, so that what you're articulating can happen even with a single sponsor in the beginning.
Perfect.
So yeah. Alex is giving us the loop.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody.